Well, good afternoon, everyone. I feel like it's been a long time coming, but we are so excited to be kicking off the first information session for the Draft Michigan Environmental Justice Screening Tool, or MiEJScreen. You're going to hear that being said a lot this afternoon, I hope. So like I said, we're really excited to be here today. I've got a couple of things to go over before we really kick off talking about the tool itself. The first thing that I want to do is just really quickly introduce who I have here to talk to all of you this afternoon. So first of all, my name is Jennifer Dixon, and I work in EGLE's Environmental Support Division. I'm the Air Quality Liaison. So if you've been participating in any recent Air Quality Division public meetings or hearings, you will have probably seen me. But for those of you I don't know, I'm Jennifer, so nice to meet you. I also have Katie Lambeth, and she is in our Environmental Justice Office of Public Advocate. So Katie's going to be talking with you after I get done with the intro stuff. She's going to kick us off. And then I also have John Esch. He's a geologist with EGLE, but he has worked very extensively on this tool. So we're really thankful to have John with us to chat with you this afternoon as well. And then I have my co-host Ryan Blazek. He works with me in Environmental Support Division. He's going to be backing me up on anything that happens. Hopefully logistically nothing happens. Hopefully we'll be all good, but he's there in case we need him. So thanks, Ryan, for joining us. Much appreciated. So welcome, everybody. I know I said that already, but and I'm kind of trying to contain my excitement, really, honestly. But we're going to be talking with you about a lot of things. And if you haven't had any time to play around in the tool, this is going to feel very kind of maybe technical, or it might look like a lot, but really this is kind of a kickoff to really encourage you all to just get in there, look at things. We're going to go over a lot of the background information. So how was the tool developed in the first place? What kinds of information are in there? What are the environmental indicators? What are the socioeconomic indicators? How are they kind of in the system itself? We're going to show you the tool. We're going to walk through some of the high level things of it, but it is kind of a big detailed thing. So we're hoping that you spend some time just kind of poking around in it. That's why we wanted to have a 60-day comment period, so folks really have a lot of time to join us for these kinds of sessions, hear about the tool itself, and then give us their feedback. So we're really hoping for some great feedback. That's why we put this out there in draft, because we know it can be better. We know it can be different. So really hoping that all of you being with us this afternoon, and then we've got another session this evening in case you're, really maybe gluttons for punishment and want to join us for that one as well. We'd love it. So a little bit of the background information, Katie's going to go over a lot of that information, like I said, what went into the tool. Then we're going to kick it over to John, and he's going to walk you through the screening tool itself. And we're going to talk about some examples. We're going to look at different parts of the state. We're going to look at some of those different layers and how they play in together. So that's going to be really a cool part of it. We're going to have a question and answer session. So we are going to be done at 2:30 today, just to let folks know you can pop off if you want to early, leave and come back. It kind of doesn't matter, but we will be having a Q&A portion today. We're going to talk about how to provide comments. So we've got a lot of different ways you can provide comments to us on the tool. We didn't really want to limit things in case you have a simple comment or maybe something more detailed. We're going to talk about where you can get more information. So Ryan is going to be sharing out in the chat a lot of the different links to the stuff that we're going to be talking about. So from some high level things like here's the Michigan Environmental Justice webpage, to here's the tool, to here's the information on how to use the tool, things like that. So hopefully you find that useful as well. And then always we want to let you know that you can contact us if you have other questions or want further information, things like that. So I want to do a couple just quick housekeeping type of things before we dig into it, just to let you know that your lines are going to be muted during the meeting today, but we are recording this. So a little bit about that is once we get done with these different sessions, so throughout the 60-day comment period, we're not only having these two information sessions, but we're also going to have 2 sets of office hours, which are just kind of like a lunchtime thing where folks can come in and say, hey, Katie, how do I do this? Hey, John, how do I find this information? I'm looking for this. Is it here? That kind of thing where it's very much like a how to, I'm stuck on this. Can you help me? Like a math problem that maybe you have, that you need an answer to, or you need a tutorial on, that kind of thing. And then we're going to also be having 2 more opportunities where we're going to do another information session, which is going to be similar to this, but maybe like kicked up a notch a little bit. With a Q&A, and then there will be opportunity for public comment to be taken on the record at those meetings. So that's going to be later on in April, towards the end of the comment period, which is May 16th. So once we get these meetings recorded, we won't be recording the office hours, but we will be recording all the other 4 meetings. We're going to post those links on the website, and they'll also be on EGLE's YouTube channel. So we'll share those out with folks that have attended, just so that you have all the information that you might need in case you missed something, things like that. All right, one other thing before I will give it over to Katie. So I know we have a couple of people that have called in on the phone, and then we have lots of folks that are joining online. So the easiest way for you to get a question in, or not forget your question, I guess at least this works best for me, is just to type it in that question and answer box. So that will help us get through those, at the end of the time. And if you are calling in, you can raise your hand. So you can, if you really feel, strongly about speaking your question out loud, that's also fine. You can use the raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen, or if you're calling in, that's just going to be #2. So just a quick reminder that today we're going to do Q&A. We're not taking comments today, so no pressure. You have plenty of time to put your comments in some of those other ways, via email or voicemail, or through that public comment opportunity that we're going to have in April. So Katie, if you want to go ahead and share your screen, and then you can take it away from there. And obviously say hi to the people as well. All right, I can see your screen, so you should be good to go.
Great, thank you, Jennifer. As Jennifer mentioned, I'm Katie Lambeth. I'm EGLE's Environmental Justice and Tribal Liaison. And to begin, I'm just going to talk a little bit about environmental justice in Michigan. Integrating equity and environmental justice into state government is vital for the state of Michigan. Governor Whitmer's Executive Order 2009-06 created the Office of Environmental Justice Public Advocate, as well as the Interagency Environmental Justice Response Team within EGLE, with the goal of assuring that all Michigan residents benefit from the same protections from environmental hazards, and to work to achieve Michigan's goal of becoming a national leader in achieving environmental justice. The role of Environmental Justice Public Advocate was created to lead the office, and the office was created as a Type 1 agency within EGLE with a direct line to the governor's office. Many of you know Regina Strong, who is EGLE's Environmental Justice Public Advocate. The executive order specifically named several state departments as part of the response team, including departments of agriculture and rural development, civil rights, health and human services, natural resources, transportation, the Michigan Strategic Fund, and the Public Service Commission. But since its inception, we've invited all state agencies to the table to make sure that we're providing a comprehensive picture of programs and policies that affect environmental justice communities. So as you can see, here's the organizational structure of both the office and the response team. At the bottom of the chart, you can see that 4 work groups were formed for the response team to help achieve the priorities of both the office and the response team. The 4 work groups were formed with representation from departments on the response team and include communications and outreach, planning and policy, training, and research and development. The primary objective of the research and development work group was the development of Michigan's environmental justice mapping and screening tool, or MiEJScreen, which is what we're here today to talk about. Michigan also has an advisory council on environmental justice, which I'll talk about next. As part of the state's environmental justice work, the state's first Environmental Justice Advisory Council was formed on January 23rd, 2020. The MAC-EJ, as we refer to it, is an advisory board for environmental justice actions spearheaded by both the response team and the office. Members represent an intentional combination of frontline activists, advocacy organizations, academia, tribal representation, local governments, business and industry, public health, and labor. This picture is from the first meeting between the MiEJ and the response team. Michigan defines environmental justice as the equitable treatment and meaningful involvement of all people regardless of race, color, national origin, ability, or income, and is critical to the development and application of laws, regulations, and policies that affect the environment, as well as the places people live, work, play, worship, and learn. Equitable treatment means no group of people bears a disproportionate share of the negative consequences resulting from operations and policies. All people benefit from the applications of laws and regulations and eliminating barriers and repairing systemic injustice. Meaningful involvement means that people have an opportunity to participate in decisions, that decision makers seek out and facilitate that involvement, that people's concerns are considered in the decision, and that people can influence state agency decisions. Now I'm going to talk about some background on the development of the tool. In 2017, Governor Snyder created the Environmental Justice Work Group following direct recommendations from the Flint Water Advisory Task Force. The work group was charged with developing recommendations to improve environmental justice awareness and engagement. The work group developed a set of 33 recommendations, including a recommendation to develop an environmental justice screening tool in Michigan and include cumulative impacts in the decision-making process. These recommendations also informed the creation of both the Office of Environmental Justice Public Advocate and the Interagency Environmental Justice Response Team. Both the office and the response team identified this as a priority, and the data and research work group that I mentioned previously began meeting in December of 2019. Two research projects conducted by graduate students from the University of Michigan under the advisement of Dr. Paul Mohai contribute to the tool's development as well by examining the feasibility of creating a Michigan-specific screening tool and providing recommendations on best practices for the development of a screening tool in Michigan. Both those reports are listed on the screen if you have interest in checking them out. The development of the draft tool has occurred over the last 2 years, so we're very excited to have it out. MiEJScreen was developed through collaboration with several state agencies and evaluation of environmental justice mapping tools, including California's EnviroScreen and the United States Environmental Protection Agency's EGLE, as well as similar tools from other states and municipalities. During the development, the office sought input from various stakeholders, including the MiEJ and the 102 participants in 8 regional roundtables held across the state in April and May of 2021. The draft tool has also been released for a 60-day public review and comment period. The primary purpose of MiEJScreen is to examine and map environmental, health, and socioeconomic indicators to identify communities in Michigan that may be disproportionately impacted by environmental hazards. While the full uses and purposes of the tool will be developed over time, other environmental justice mapping and screening tools have been used to prioritize resource allocation, identify areas for additional outreach, guide policy decisions, and prioritize programs such as redevelopment and enforcement. MiEJScreen is designed to be used by multiple stakeholders. Now I'll transition in talking about the methodology, scoring, and indicators used in MiEJScreen. I apologize if some of this is a little technical, but I think it's important for us to discuss. If you want more in-depth information on any of these, please refer to the draft MiEJScreen technical report, and we'll show you how to access the report later in the presentation. The methodology used for MiEJScreen is based on California's EnviroScreen, which is a screening tool that evaluates the burden of pollution from multiple sources while accounting for potential vulnerability to those adverse effects of pollution. So there are 2 sides to the equation, burden and vulnerability. Similar to EnviroScreen, MiEJScreen is based on potential exposures to pollutants, environmental conditions, socioeconomic factors, and the prevalence of certain health conditions to produce scores for every census tract in the state. In the next slide, I'll talk about what a census tract is and why we chose to use census tracts. The scores are mapped so that different communities can be compared. An area with a high score is one that experiences more impacts than areas with low scores. We use percentile ranking in order to compare scores for each census tract, which I will talk about in a couple slides. MiEJScreen ranks communities based on data that are available from state and federal sources. The indicators selected were based on the availability of national or statewide data that could be incorporated into the tool at the appropriate geographic scale. Therefore, we were limited in the data that we could include in the tool, and we recognize that MiEJScreen doesn't include every environmental or health impact communities are facing. So census tracts are small, relatively permanent subdivisions of a county designated by the United States Census Bureau. Census tract boundaries are determined with the goal of being maintained over a long time so that statistical comparisons can be made over time. Therefore, data is often readily available at this geographic scale. Census tracts range in size, but have an average population of 4,000 people. Census tracts are used to represent the location of communities across Michigan. In Michigan, there are 2,767 census tracts. As you can see in this image, because census tracts are population-based, the areas range in size. Whoops. As I mentioned previously for the MiEJScreen overall score, each census tract is given a percentile rank based on how the overall score for that census tract compares to other census tracts in Michigan. This image shows how the overall score is displayed on the map. So each of these color bins represents 10% of census tracts, with the 90th to 100th percentile being the highest scores and the 0 to 10th percentiles being the lowest scores. As I mentioned previously, Michigan has 2,767 census tracts, so each color bin represents approximately 276 tracts. As an example, as you can see in this highlighted tract, it has an overall score that falls in the 25th percentile, which is represented on the map in the blue shaded color bin for the 20 to 30th percentile. When comparing this census tract to the rest of the state, 75% of census tracts in Michigan have a higher score, while 24% have a lower score. Now I'm going to talk about how MiEJScreen overall score is calculated. So the MiEJScreen overall score is made up of two subscores, the environmental conditions and the population characteristics. These two subscores are further divided into 4 categories. There are 2 categories representing environmental conditions. Those are environmental exposures and environmental effects, and 2 categories representing population characteristics. So those are sensitive populations and socioeconomic factors. Each of the categories has a set of indicators, which I'll talk about more in depth in a few minutes. An indicator is a measure of either environmental conditions representing pollution burden or health or vulnerability factors for population characteristics. The individual indicators are scored for each census tract by its raw value, then assigned percentiles based on rank order. Those percentile scores are averaged for each of the 4 categories. So for environmental exposures, environmental effects, sensitive populations, and socioeconomic factors. To generate the subscores, the averaged percentile scores for the respective categories were added together and averaged. Please note the environmental effects indicators were weighed half the environmental exposure indicators because they only represent potential exposure. The environmental conditions and population characteristic scores were then scaled and assigned a value between 0 and 10. The scaling ensures that the environmental conditions and population characteristic subscores contribute equally to the overall MiEJScreen score. The overall MiEJScreen score is calculated by multiplying the subscores. Since each group has a maximum score of 10, the maximum MiEJScreen score is 100. Census tracts are then ordered from highest to lowest based on their overall score. A percentile for the overall score is then calculated from the ordered values. As I showed you in the previous slide, the tool maps the cumulative overall MiEJScreen score for every census tract in the state in percentile rank. The user can also see the subscores, the category scores, and each of the individual 26 indicator scores in percentiles using the tool. John's going to show you how to do this when we go through the tool demonstration. All right, now I'm going to get into the indicators in each of the categories. Exposure indicators are based on measurements of different types of pollution that people may come into contact with. Most of these are air quality related issues. Ingesting, inhaling, or otherwise interacting with the substances generated or described by some of these indicators in the category have been associated with poor health outcomes. For example, exposure to high levels of ambient ozone have been associated with reductions in lung functioning. The National Scale Air Toxics Assessment, or NADA, Air Toxics Cancer Risk Indicator, measures the lifetime cancer risk from inhalation or breathing in of air toxics. Air toxics, often referred to as a hazardous air pollutants, are pollutants that are known to or suspected to cause cancer or other serious health effects. This indicator comes from EPA's EGLE and uses the most recent data from EPA's National Scale Air Toxics Assessment. NADA estimates cancer risk and non-cancer risk of 187 air pollutants classified as hazardous air pollutants. The same information is used for the next two indicators. The NADA Respiratory Hazard Index measures a ratio of exposure concentration to health-based reference concentration, and the NADA Diesel Particulate Matter measures diesel particulate matter levels in the outdoor air as micrograms per cubic meter of air. Particulate matter is a measurement of particulate matter that is 2.5 microns or smaller in size, levels in the outdoor air as an annual average. This indicator also comes from EPA's EGLE. This is the same as with the next indicator, ozone, which is a measurement of the summer seasonal average of daily maximum 8-hour concentrations in the outdoor air in parts per billion. The last indicator measures traffic density within a buffered 150 meters of a census tract. This is normalized by vehicles per day divided by the adjusted road length in miles. This indicator comes from the Michigan Department of Transportation. Environmental effect indicators generally show proximity to or known or potential contamination sites. As I mentioned previously, because the environmental effect indicators represent only proximity to potential exposure rather than true exposure, this category is weighed by half its total when factored into the MiEJScreen score to better reflect the risk to nearby populations. Living in proximity to environmental degradation, such as impaired water bodies or cleanup sites, as this category represents, can affect the health of communities in several ways. Several of the indicators included in this category have been associated with the prevalence of diseases ranging from cardiovascular to reproductive. Additionally, living in environmentally degraded communities can cause members to feel stressed and unsafe, both of which are risks to human health. Poor environmental quality may also prevent community members from enjoying or utilizing their environment, including those that are associated with health benefits, such as outdoor recreation. The proximity to cleanup sites indicator measures the proximity to cleanup sites regulated under Part 201 of Michigan's Natural Resources and Environmental Protection Act as well as sites regulated under Part 213, leaking underground storage tank sites, and Superfund sites, which are sites on the Environmental Protection Agency's National Priority List. This data comes from EGLE's Remediation and Redevelopment Division and EPA. Proximity to hazardous waste facilities measures proximity to hazardous waste facilities, including treatment, storage, and disposal facilities, and large quantity generators. This data comes from EPA's MiEJScreen and EGLE's Materials Management Division. Impaired water bodies measures the summed number of pollutants across all water bodies designated as impaired within the area. This data comes from EGLE's Water Resource Division's list of Great Lakes, inland lakes, wetlands, streams, and rivers that are listed impaired under Section 303D of the Federal Clean Water Act. Proximity to solid waste sites and facilities measures proximity to regulated, licensed landfills, old dump sites, and scrap tire sites. This data comes from EGLE's Material Management Division. The lead paint indicator is the percent of housing built before 1960. This data comes from EPA's MiEJScreen and was developed using data from the United States Census Bureau's American Community Survey 5-year estimate from 2015 to 2019. Proximity to Rmp sites. This is a proximity to facilities with risk management plans. These are facilities that are required by federal law to file risk management plans. Facilities are obligated to file risk management plans with the EPA if it maintains a quantity of a regulated substance above a certain threshold. This data comes from EPA's MiEJScreen. Finally, the wastewater discharge indicator is the toxicity weighted concentrations in stream segments within an area, which means the indicator gives greater weight to releases of highly toxic chemicals than those less toxic. This data comes from EPA's MiEJScreen as well. Sensitive population indicators refer to human populations that experience increased vulnerability to environmental health risk factors such as pollution. Such populations include individuals with impaired health conditions due to disease and genetic factors. Pollution is not only a likely contributor to the generation of such conditions, but has also been found to worsen them. For example, exposure to environmental pollutants is both a known risk factor for developing asthma, an indicator within this category, and a known trigger for asthma attacks. All of the data for indicators in this category was prepared by the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, except the life expectancy indicator. The asthma indicator measures the rate of emergency department visits for asthma averaged over 2016 to 2019. The cardiovascular disease indicator measures rate of hospitalization for cardiovascular disease averaged over 2016 to 2019. Low birth weight infants measures percent low birth weight averaged over 2014 to 2019. Low birth weight refers to newborns weighing less than 5.5 pounds. The blood level indicator is the blood lead level indicator is the percent of tested children under age 6 with elevated blood lead levels, which is measured as greater than or equal to 5 micrograms of lead per deciliter of blood. Life expectancy is the average number of years a person can expect to live, estimated average from 2010 to 2015. This data comes from the National Center for Health Statistics. Please note on the tool that individuals with lower life expectancy are scored higher than those with higher life expectancy. Our final category, socioeconomic factors, are indicators that show conditions that may increase people's stress or make healthy living difficult and cause them to be more sensitive to pollution's effects. The susceptibility of communities of color and low-income populations to various environmental conditions has been reaffirmed many times through research. Non-white populations to be more likely to live in proximity to air pollution and to experience negative health outcomes associated with exposure. Other socioeconomic factors that represent increased vulnerability have also been included. All of these indicators come from the United States Census Bureau's American Community Survey, 5-year estimates from 2015 to 2019. Low income population is the percent of population living below 2 times the federal poverty level. Black, Indigenous, people of color is the sum of all race, ethnicity categories except white, non-Hispanic. It includes Black, American Indian, Alaskan Native, Asian, Native Hawaiian, and other Pacific Islander, and 2 or more races. Educational attainment is the percent of population over age 25 with less than a high school education. Linguistic isolation is the percent limited English-speaking households, which is defined as a household in which all members 14 years and older speak a non-English language and also speak English less than very well. Population under 5 is the percent of the population under 5. Population over 64 is a percent of the population over age 64. Unemployment is percent of the population over the age of 16 that is unemployed and eligible for the labor force. This excludes retirees, students, homemakers, and institutionalized persons. Finally, housing burden is a percent of households paying more than 30% of their income on shelter costs. Shelter costs include rent, mortgage, principal and interest payments, insurance, utilities, and taxes. The tool also has additional layers that help to put the MiEJScreen layers into context. This isn't the entire list of context layers, but gives you an idea of the type of information that is included. The context layers with an asterisk are used in calculating some of the environmental effect indicators. For example, the sites of environmental contamination, part 201, were used to calculate the proximity to cleanup site indicator. We also have additional environmental justice layers such as the homeowners, loan corporation, neighborhood redlining grade maps. So this information is important for understanding how past policies and practices have contributed to current situations. The Holt created a neighborhood ranking system known today as redlining. This was created during the Great Depression, and the group was meant to help the general population by expanding home buying opportunities and providing relief for unaffordable mortgages. To determine the loans they would guarantee, they sent appraisers to cities across the nation where they documented information such as the type of housing and demographics present there. These reports documented blatantly racist observations that equated non-white residents to quote unquote detrimental influences. The appraisals were then used to generate residential security maps, which banks used to determine eligibility for mortgages. This practice formalized racial housing discrimination, as communities of color were often deemed to be hazardous or declining, areas where banks refused to offer loans. The labeling of non-white neighborhoods as dangerous areas for lending, called redlining, not only produced segregation based on race in American cities, but also contributed to the racial wealth gap. We also have some climate indicators, including urban heat islands and percent tree canopy, as well as other EJ layers such as food deserts and non-attainment areas. We also included several geographic features, such as tribal lands and counties, as well as locations of schools and hospitals. If you're interested in additional information on how to use the tool and more detailed information on the methodology and the indicators used in the tools, please refer to these supporting documents. The fact sheet's a short document that provides an overview of MiEJScreen. The user guide provides information on how to use the tool and its various functions, which John's going to show a little bit in a few minutes. And then the draft technical report details the development of MiEJScreen, including purposes and intended uses, limitations of the tool, as well as the data and methods used to develop the tool. As Jennifer mentioned, we are accepting comments on the draft tool and supporting documents through May 16th, 2022. You can submit a comment in a variety of ways, and please bear with me as I read these out loud for those who are on the phone and can't see the screen. And Jennifer will also review this information at the end of the session. So comments can be submitted in writing to EGLE, Office of Environmental Justice Public Advocate, P.O. Box 30473, Lansing, Michigan 48909. Through email at EGLE, that's EGLE environmentaljustice@michigan.gov. Through voicemail at 517-284-1400, as well as at the public comment opportunities on April 27th. We will have a session from 1 to 2:30, as well as one from 6 to 7:30, similar to what we're doing today. So there's a lot of great information if you go to the MiEJScreen landing page, which includes information on how to register for the informational webinar and public comment sessions on April 27th. We will also be putting the recordings of today's sessions there. There's also links to attend the office hours on April 13th and May 2nd. There's no need to register for those. You just click on the link and join on those days. And this is where you'll have the opportunity to ask questions on how to use the tool and its various functions. It also, you can also access the tool and the supporting documents at the website. And the easiest way to get there is to go to michigan.gov/environmental justice and click on the MiEJScreen tab in the top right. So John's going to show you how to do that and how to get to the tool as part of his tool demonstration. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to John.
Thanks, Katie. Share my screen here. I'm going to turn off my camera just to help on the bandwidth. So, hi, my name is John Esch. I work as a geologist with the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes Energy and Oil and Gas Minerals Division. I'm giving you a short demonstration on the use of the tool, some of the data sets, and some of the functionality and how to get there. There's a number of different ways to get there. This is the Office of Environmental Justice Public Advocate main website. You can also get there by Googling MiEJScreen in Google. Once you're here, if you click on MiEJScreen, it'll take you to the main MiEJScreen website. This is where there's links to the fact sheet, the scoring matrix, the technical report, user guide, and also 2 links to the applications. There's one executive summary version, we'll show you that in just a minute, and a full version. Also information on how to provide comments, where to learn more, how to attend additional sessions, a little bit more on the scoring matrix, and some more detail on each indicator, on each of the major categories and indicators themselves. So I'm going to start out with showing the executive summary version. Yeah, this is what it looks like. So this is kind of the a simple version of the MiEJScreen. Limited functionality, but the content of the overall score is still here. For instance, this census tract has a MiEJ score percentile of 11, and it's showing the 2 subscores in bold, the environmental conditions and population characteristics, but also some of the categories beneath. But also we have a little bit of demography, showing how many people live in that tract, population per square mile, but also median income and unemployment rate. We also have a kind of a chart that shows those 4 categories. So for instance, this tract actually scores fairly low for exposure, environmental effects, but also pretty high for sensitive populations and socioeconomic. If we compare that, say, with a census tract down here in the Metro Detroit area, it scores fairly high in the overall score, but also fairly high in all the other major categories. So once we're here, we'll show this in more detail, but You can toggle out and off the legend. You can search by an address or place. You can print a map. You can find out more information. You can also share this on social media. So this is, for many folks, this is maybe all they need. I just need to see the overall score. For other folks, maybe they need to dig in and be able to dig down and find out what this score was created from. So we're going to go to the overall application. You can also get there from, it says EGLE full screen. Also get the technical report from this executive summary version. So I'm going to quickly just do a refresh. So this is how it would look like if you started from scratch. There's a splash screen that comes up. Gives a little information on how to contact, how to supply comments, but also gives you a little more information on the scoring matrix. So in this app, there's a number of widgets in the upper left-hand corner. You may use the term widgets in tools or icons interchangeably in the upper left and also in the upper right. I'm going to quickly go through some of these tools quickly first, and I'm going to go into more detail for some of the more advanced tools. But broadly, there's a number of ways to navigate the screen. You can either search by an address or place or census tract. You can use your scroll wheel to zoom in and out. You also use the typical zoom in, zoom out button. If you want to go to the full screen of the Michigan, again, here's the full screen mode. If you want to go to a previous extent, this is how you can do it. Another way to navigate are the bookmarks. So these are just large city bookmarks across the state. You can also create your own bookmarks. So if you're working in a given area, you're working that, you can go in there over and over again, day in, day out, you can create your own bookmarks. So many of these tools you can toggle on and off. So for instance, on a legend's on and off is on by default, but sometimes when you're navigating and doing certain functions in the MiEJScreen, the legend will turn off. So if you need to turn it back on again, you can just toggle right here. So legend is going to show you anything that's turned on in this layer list or in the context layer list. So for instance, we're showing the overall score right now. I'm going to show you environmental conditions subscore. You can see how it shows the change in the legend. If you have multiple things shown either in the layer list or the context layer list, they'll all show in the legend. So just really briefly, I'm going to show you some of the subscores, the four major categories, and some of the indicators. So again, here's the environmental conditions subscore, and here's a population characteristics subscore. So this environmental conditions subscore, it's made up of the exposure category and the environmental effects category. You see they're all using the same legend. So the darker red has higher concerns, and the blue are lower, and the light blue and this color here are in the middle. I'll show you some examples of some of these indicators. So for instance, this is a air toxic cancer risk, and this is traffic density. That's under exposure. Again, under environmental effects, let me show you an example of that. Let's show you cleanup sites. Let's just zoom into this area in Metro Detroit area. We'll show more on the cleanup sites in just a minute. I'm just giving you a broad overview. For the sensitive populations, so this is the category score. Let me show you life expectancy. As just an example. Let's zoom into the Metro Detroit area. Click on one of these census tracts. So this census tract is in the 92nd percentile as far as life expectancy, which is actually lower life expectancy. If we of 72 years. If we click on this census tract, its percentile is 8. Its life expectancy is 83. I hope that's clear, but also shows more of the demography here. But also what you can do is this information on the race and ethnicity profile for some of these tracks. That's at the bottom of the pop-up. So the other major category, socioeconomic. Again, I'm going to zoom out to the statewide scale. Let me show you the population over 64 and also low-income population. So the whole idea for showing the 4 major categories is to show that these categories make up these 2 subscores, and these 2 subscores make up the overall score. Let's zoom in and look at two census tracts in the Washtenaw County in the Metro Detroit area. So we're going to look at the overall score. This is a census tract in the northern part of Washtenaw County. This overall score is in the 8th percentile. And this census tract here is in the 94th percentile. But as Katie mentioned earlier, the census tracts are based on population. So this census tract here is approximately a township or 36 square miles, where the census tract has it's 0.2 of a square mile. Again, we can look at different components. The census tract, for instance, is percentile of 98 on the exposure, has 33 on the environmental effects, and has 97 on census populations, and 80 percentile socioeconomic. This census tract, if you scroll down, it's in the middle of the environmental effects of 42 percentile, 30 low on exposure, 30 low on sensitive populations and socioeconomic. Showed you earlier this layer of cleanup sites indicator. I will show you where that some of the information came from. So this proximity cleanup sites, it's based on 3 sub-indicators. So we're going to go over to the context layers. So these context layers, as Katie mentioned, they're, in some cases, they're the raw data behind the EJ scores. In some cases, they're just data sets to put the main EJ data in context. So for instance, the cleanups sites indicator based on Part 201 sites, proximity leaking underground storage tank sites, and proximity Superfund sites. And so any of these layers in the context layers or the main EJ layers, we can click on them and get attributes for them, just for instance. Let's turn that off. Let's go back to the overall EJ score. One of the significant context layers that Katie pointed out are the redlining maps. So not all cities in Michigan have redlining maps available. These are the ones that have them. So for instance, let's zoom into the Muskegon area. We're going to turn on the overall score. Let's click on this census tract here. So this census tract was rated a D or hazardous. And so on your own time, you can click on some of these other attributes. You can see the actual scanned redline map and the actual forms for this. Let's turn out the redline maps. Let me show you some of the other indicators, some of the other widgets, I'm sorry. Let's go to Bay City. Let's change this overall score. Let's say we're concerned about respiratory hazard. So what we can do is you can actually change this background map. So another widget is the base map gallery. Defaults to this grayscale canvas. We can change this to an aerial photo, the street map, or topographic. But again, the default is the grayscale. Some of the other widgets that are available is Glossary. So this Glossary gives some information on each one of the indicators and each one of the categories, subscores, and overall score, but also some information on the sources and methodology for some of these indicators, but also some of the context layers, and also the sources for most of these. Another one of the widgets is the print function. So a person can zoom into an area, turn layers on and off. They can give it a title and print it to a PDF and save it for your own use. Another one of the widgets is the filter tool. So let me zoom out entire state. Right now we're looking at the NATA respiratory hazard index. Let's do a filter on this. So any of these MiEJScreen index layers, categories, or overall scores, we can filter. So let's go to the respiratory hazard index. Let's filter this on the 60th percentile. So only the census tracts that are above the 60th percentile will show up here. So you can filter different indicators for different levels. You can turn on different indicators to see if there's any relationship between different indicators, or just get an idea where are the highest values for a given indicator. This widget allows you to add your own data. So for instance, let me go to the statewide scale. Let's say you have your own data, either your own site, a watershed, a project you're working on. You can add it either as a file or as a URL. So for instance, this is a layer of health insurance coverage you can find online. What it'll do, it'll add it to the map, and see how this is grayscale. Some of these are scale dependent. We need to zoom in a little closer. So this is an external data set. We'll turn off the hazard index. You can get attributes. So it allows the user to incorporate their own local or national data sets in with this. But also allows you to see if there's any correspondence between layers. So here's the overall score. This ellipsis on the right allows you to change the transparency. So I'm going to slide this over to the left and right. Right now we're seeing this health insurance percentage to be fully transparent. Now we're seeing that over top of the overall score, sliding it back. So this is the percent of people with health insurance, without health insurance. Another example, for instance, if you have a GIS shape file. So for instance, I'm going to click the add. I go to file. This is a GIS shape file of energy burden. So these are all the census tracts with the energy burden where their energy costs are over 5% of income. So it just allows flexibility for people to add their own data. To remove those, I'm just going to delete them. Go back to the overall score. Let me show you this screening tool.
Hey, John, really quick before you move on, since you were just showing about adding data and adding shape files and things like that, we just had a quick question in the chat about if we do that, is that sharing that information with community, or is it pretty much just sharing it with yourself and doing your own sort of overlays. So I thought you just might want to talk about that a minute before you move on to your next topic.
Yeah, that's just your own your personal session, so no one else can see any data that you add. So on this report function, it allows a person to create a canned report for an area, a polygon, or a line. So for instance, I'm going to zoom into the Lansing area. Let's say, for instance, I have a site. My site is at 525 West Elgin Street. I'm going to select this name. You'll see why I did it in a second. And I'm going to do a 1.5 mile buffer. You can select any buffer distance you want. Click report. Let me zoom in. So there's 19 census tracts that overlap this 1.5 mile buffer. So you could click on this and view individual census tracts for the different indicators. You can also create this canned report. So I'm just going to paste that address, the title, and type in 1.5 buffer. So this canned report, it takes that 1.5 mile buffer or whatever buffer distance you want and gives you a report of all the census tracts that are within that in that buffer, and also their scores. Click print. Normally it would create a map, display the map where that location was. But here are your MiEJScreen scores, your two sub scores. It also gives you some basic demographics, median income. It also gives you your actual category scores and your indicator scores. So you can save this as a PDF file, save it locally. You could submit that or store it in your file. Another tool or widget might be useful is the side-by-side screen viewer. So any of these EGLE layers, either in the main layer list or the context layer list, you can view side by side. So for instance, here's the overall score. Let's change this overall score to one of the context layers. Let's look at it, impervious surfaces, which is a good proxy for climate change concerns, for environmental justice concerns. Or let's change this to urban heat islands. So as you pan and zoom around the map, it gives you a similar geography. So you click, again, you get the same attributes, whether you're in the main map or whether you're in the side-by-side viewer. A couple other quick widgets. This is the share widget. So you can share a link to a map. So if you have several layers turned on, zoomed in, you can share that either as an email to a colleague, or you can also share it with social media. These other widgets, this is the About widget. This About widget gives you some basic information about the widget, and also some of the other links, some more information. This final widget, this is the how-to map, how to use the map, just basic functionality, what each of the widgets or tools do. And if you want more information, our user's guide has much more detailed information on how to use the different tools. So that was just a brief overview of some of the tools and functionality and some of the data with the EGLE.
So Katie, just looking at some of the questions that we have some functionality questions. And since John's in the tool right now, do you want to go through a few of those? Is that
Sure.
a good idea? Okay.
Sounds like a good idea.
Just because you were talking about them, John, and since you're sort of in that mode already, I figured maybe we would just want to talk a little bit about that. So one of the questions that came in, which was interesting, and I hadn't thought of this before either, is can you create usernames to save data searches? So like, for instance, I was thinking of this like from a bookmarking standpoint. Is there a way to save, you know, that bookmark or that information? Or like you said, you could print to a PDF. Maybe that's a kind of a way that you could do that. But are there other ways that you can do that within the tool itself?
So one thing you can do is for a given user, they can actually, it'll remember where they last were. So for instance, let me zoom into the thumb area. Let me turn on environmental condition subscore. Let me just turn on a couple of indicators. Let's turn on non-NPL sites, toxic waste inventory sites, brownfield sites. And so if I exit out or do a refresh, you get a message down here that says, click to restore the map extent and layers visible where you left off. So if I click on this, it'll go back to where you were previously. So it's not necessarily a bookmark, but it's a way to go back to where you left off.
Okay, no, that's helpful. And in a similar vein, so let's say you do that, you turn on a few of those layers and you focus in on an area, maybe you even add, you know, your circumference of the area you want to look at, and you share a link of that screen with somebody. When they get the link, what are they going to see? Is it going to go back to the splash screen? Are they going to be able to see that specific data? So do they have to, like, you know, do that download of that report, save it and send it that way? Or what's the best way to do that?
So on that, on the reporting widget, it's not going to save that. But for instance, if we, you know, this,
yeah, can you go through how to do the report again too? Because we did have another question. So while you're doing this, if you don't mind walking through that, that would be helpful too.
So for instance, on the share widget, you know, I could click on email, and it'll actually create. It'll actually, I'm not sure if you can see my screen. You probably can't. Do you guys see my email?
No, we won't be able to see it.
Okay. So what it'll do is it'll open up your email client, and it'll have that as a link. You can forward that email to a colleague or another person. So they would see this exact same screen, whatever was turned on. If you want to go back to the reporting widget, for instance, let's say you have a site here in Saginaw. I'm going to draw a point. So you're interested on this intersection. Let's say I want a 2-mile buffer. Click report. So there's 16 census tracts that overlap that buffer. Click print. I'm just going to type Saginaw. Normally, when you do this, a nice map of whatever layer you have turned on shows up.
I know, I love that map. There you go, because this is one of the differences between EPA's EGLE and ours is you get this like really nice snapshot, I think. So I'm glad it showed up this time.
So again, here's your MiEJScreen scores, you got your basic demography, but also all the subscores, categories, and indicators. Did it answer that question?
Yep, nope, that's really helpful.
Okay.
I got one more question for you, and then I'm going to start throwing some stuff to Katie. So because you're sort of and I hope this isn't throwing you under the bus, John, but I think people probably figured this out by now just listening, that you're kind of a mappy guy. I'm kind of a mappy girl, but maybe not as mappy as you are. So one of the questions was, so for instance, the data layer that you showed with the insurance rates, how do you find those? Like if you're looking for things like that, do you have a certain methodology that you use, or maybe keywords that you might search to find available open data layers? EGLE has our own open data layer page with a lot of different things, but I know other people do. So how are you finding those that are sort of outside of our realm?
So if people have ESRI or ArcGIS online or ArcGIS accounts, ArcGIS has a kind of a data warehouse called Living Atlas of the World. And Living Atlas of the World, the advantage there is they've taken a lot of this very complex census data and kind of simplified it dramatically. And so, and many of those Living Atlas of the World layers are available for free from ArcGIS Online. So if a person went into Google or their favorite browser and typed Living Atlas of the World and one of the layers they're interested in, they could add that layer. But also there's a lot of other layers, like say different states have different GIS warehouses. Or maybe you work in a county and you have some projects where you already have shape files already created, the outline of a facility or an area. You could add those, make sure they have to be zipped up to use. I hope that answered the question.
Oh yeah, that's good. I appreciate that. And maybe what we can do too is share the link or the search terms for the, I think you said Living Atlas of the World. I could be lying.
Correct.
I think that's what you said.
Yeah.
Okay. We could probably share that in our subsequent data information. So there should be, you should be able to Google that and find it, but we'll try to share that in our follow-ups too. So those are great questions. So just as a reminder, you guys are doing a great job putting questions in the question and answer. So just to remind everybody, and Katie, I think I kind of want to leave John up, if that's okay, just because if we get other functionality questions, and then we can talk through some of these other ones just while that's up, if you don't mind. John, do you mind just putting it back to the state view for that? Because that might inspire some folks too. So the first question that I want to get to is, it was a really nice question. And I know we've kind of been talking about this going forward, but the question was, are there any plans for training sessions for grade like 6 through 12 teachers and how to create inquiry projects? So that's a great question. I think we're going to keep that for sure in our back pocket as we go through after the draft is over and we make any changes based on comments and we start working through, what is that sort of, I'm going to call it a final version, but I'm putting quotations around that because as Katie had said earlier, I mean, this isn't going to be something that is a static piece of a static resource. It's going to be something that's ever changing and things like that. So, but great question. Thank you for that. That leads me to the first question I'm going to.
Jen, I will just jump in real quick here. We
Yeah.
have a new position at EGLE, environmental education coordinator, and she's actually already reached out to me to start having those conversations. So we're definitely thinking about it. And with that position, it's a great asset to the department to be able to develop stuff like that.
Yep, that's true. Eileen is awesome. And so we are looking forward to putting her in more to work than she already is probably. So this question goes toward, let's just look into the future and say, the tool gets approved and done after the comments are incorporated and all that stuff. And we do a great big launch. I'm hoping with balloons and cake, but that's just might be me. But the question was, so will the EJ tool be updated with 2020 census data once it's available, or how is those sort of updates going to work? And do you envision like a time frame?
Yeah, so we're thinking right now that we'll be doing an update to the tool probably every 3 to 4 years. We haven't gotten into, the nitty gritty, but there is some issues with the 2020 census data. For instance, some of the tracks did change, but also because of the pandemic, there's been some concerns raised just about the amount of participation in the census, and whether that data is truly reflective. So that's something that we're definitely talking about and looking at as we move forward in terms of updates to the tool.
Awesome. And I know, yeah, that's one of the great things about using this kind of a platform. I know EPA just put out their EGLE 2.0. So, I mean, that's, the plan for us as well. So, so in that vein, one of the questions that came in was, and I'm paraphrasing this or maybe rephrasing this, but what I read it was, why are we doing this in Michigan? How does this compare to EPA's EGLE? What are some of the differences and maybe commonalities? Should a user expect to see similar things? I know we have, the scoring, which they don't have, but, is there anything else that you can kind of touch on?
Yeah, sure. Looking at developing our own tool specific to Michigan really allowed us to include data that may not be available at the national scale. And I think the one example of that is the health data. So we were able to utilize data that's been collected from our Michigan Department of Health and Human Services and incorporate it in this tool. So that's not something I know with EPA's EGLE update, they do have some health indicators that are included in there, but that's not a part of their EJ indexes. The other big thing that you touched on, Jennifer, is that EPA's EGLE does not provide a cumulative overall score. Instead, they have several EJ indices that are based on single environmental indicators combined with low-income populations and people of color population demographics. So I forget the numbers, like 12 or 14 separate EJ indexes. So here we're looking at all of these indicators that we've identified together and producing that overall score. Last thing I'll mention in comparison to EPA's EGLE, we did utilize all of the environmental and socioeconomic indicators that EPA has on their EGLE, kind of to bridge that gap in terms of we are including some of the same information, but then more that's specific to Michigan.
No, that's really helpful. And I think if you start poking around in these two different things, you're going to notice the differences, but a lot of that underlying data is going to be the same. I know you heard Katie say, like, this is from EPA's EGLE, this is from EPA's EGLE. So it's not about necessarily reinventing the wheel in this. It's about taking that wheel and making it like way more awesome. That's kind of how I look at it. And
I
really
like that.
Enhancing it. I mean, I know that's not, that's not environmental technical speak, but we're trying to enhance it, make it a little bit more user-friendly, create a lot of the things that John talked about. These other layers are hopefully going to be providing more information for people to use in a variety of different ways. So, we did get that question, Katie, and I know you talked about this in one of your slides, and it's also in some of the background information that you talked about as well, is, what, the question is basically, how can the tool be utilized for any current or future programs? So are we planning on, informing policy decisions and what other things like that? Is there any examples that you could give potentially from that background information?
Sure. I mean, like I said, I think the uses of it are going to develop over time, as the tool's out there and we're utilizing it and different programs are utilizing it in different ways. But for sure, other screening tools have been used for resource allocation, to look at doing enhanced community engagement. And this is something that we've been using EPA's EGLE for quite regularly in our regulatory decisions, is looking at, are there any specific environmental justice concerns? Do we need to do translation interpretation? Are there limited English speaking households? So now with our MiEJScreen, we can, utilize our tool to do some of those same things. And then just really looking at overall, it gives us kind of a base to work from in terms of looking at our environmental justice and equity programs and how we can incorporate this into that into those programs.
Yeah, I envision that a lot of our comments might be, you should use it for this, and you should use it for this, and you should use it for that. And we are hoping that people do that, because even though we spend a lot of time sitting and thinking about all the things we think people outside of EGLE might even use this for, I think you're right. It's going to develop over the time, and we're going to be hearing like, oh, I used it for this and it worked great. So we're hoping people will definitely supply comments for that. So I want to go into like a little bit more of a technical question here when it's talking about how things were created. So the question is, if the tool provides comparative but not absolute results for each census tract, is it possible that the census tract might improve in absolute results, but yet get worse in some of the indicators? So have you seen that math might work out where those scores might reflect different things, even if, you know, there's certain indicators that actually get better?
Yeah, so while the tool itself is just showing the percentile scoring and to be able to compare across the state, we do have the actual scores, the raw data scores for every census tract for every indicator. So theoretically, we could, you know, over time, you know, if we're utilizing updated data, look at the comparison between, you know, one indicator from, you know, whatever year it would be to another year. I think we have to be really careful with that, just because, you know, the data are coming from all different sources. There are some limitations of it. But theoretically, we could look at, you know, how a particular census tract has changed over time as we update the tool.
So can you talk a little bit about the QA/QC that was done on some of the layers? So was there a sort of in-depth review for accuracy? And this is a good example. So specifically, like as we're creating the tool over 2 years, the possibility of things opening, closing, getting listed, delisted, you know, how much of the QA/QC was done up until the last minute? And I know that's not necessarily possible, but I'm just kind of putting it out there. And then, you know, how do you see that being done in the future to ensure that this data is as correct as it can be?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're really hoping that folks that are using the tool, that are, you know, in these communities and like looking at this information, if there's something that's, you know, just completely wrong that sticks out, you know, definitely let us know. So they're you know, utilizing people that are actually in those communities and ground truthing there. You know, we're always open to hear from folks if something doesn't look right. And Jennifer, I think part of that question too was looking at the proximity indicators. And so we did, and John, I'm going to pass this to you to explain it more. But when we looked at, like, for instance, Part 201 cleanup site, so our brownfield sites, we did a multi-ring buffer around those sites, and the scoring then was based on that. So we do have a little bit of that built into it. And here, John's bringing up the technical report right here. It kind of just, if you look at the appendix in the technical report, it'll explain that in more detail. But that's the process we used. And that's the same process that California used in their Cal EnviroScreen. So we utilize their methodology for that.
Yeah, so several of the environmental effects indicators, the cleanup sites, the solid waste scores, we use the California EnviroScreen site weight multi-ring buffer proximity method. And this is a fairly involved method. So this gives a little more detail on the process. So for instance, for solid waste facilities, we use a different site weight, but also different ring buffers around those points. For hazardous waste sites, we used a different multi-ring buffer, a different site weight, and also same thing for cleanup sites. We applied a different site weight for, say, Superfund sites compared to 201 sites versus liquid underground storage tank sites, and also different buffer distances based on those sites. And this is spelled out in detail in the appendix of the technical report.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. That's a good resource for folks too, especially if they want to dig into how that was done. Shifting gears a little bit, Katie, this was going back to maybe one of your first slides where you talked about all the different kind of pieces of the EJ puzzle in state government here in Michigan. And the question relates to how will or can MDOT and other departments work with us, with EGLE, to use the overall scores and specific indicators in their work. So I know with the interagency response team, maybe there's been some discussion on that. So I didn't know if there's things that you could share or other ways that we're collaborating for future potential projects or things like that that you could talk to.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we absolutely see this as being a tool that can be used across state government. And, that's why it's great that we have our interagency environmental justice response team, because not only were they at the table as part of the development of this tool, but then we can also have these conversations, at the state level of how this tool can be incorporated. And these conversations are already happening. I'll give one example. With the Michigan Public Service Commission is requiring an EJ analysis as part of the integrated resource management planning process. So I know there's been a lot of conversations going on how to incorporate that and how to use these type of tools to make those determinations.
No, I think that's good. And again, I feel like that's one of those things that's going to develop over time, and we're going to keep seeing different sort of uses for it, which is kind of cool as well. This is a layer question, so I'm going to put this one to John. The question was, they were looking for a specific layer based on cancer occurrences. And I know we have our NADA, I call it the NADA data or the NADA data. I know people call it different things. We have the cancer risk in there based on the hazardous air pollutants, but is there any other layers that reflect specific cancer occurrences or rates or anything like that in specific areas?
So the CDC just released a large volume health data sets like over the last 6 months. In fact, the EPA EGLE version 2, some of their health indicators is directly coming from the CDC. I don't have a link to that right now, but if the person who asks the question, they can send me an email or the phone number. I get a hold of them and give them that reference.
Yeah, we have their email address, so you can always respond specifically back for sure. Okay, that's a great point on that one. This is an interesting one too. So because there are so many layers to this and so many different things, I mean, I know you have your layer list open right now, and I feel like that can almost be overwhelming for people too. Like, which ones do I choose? How do I choose, to overlay them? But this question was, did we look at things to ensure that there wasn't duplicative layers, or there wasn't duplicative information in layers, so we're almost like double counting things? And were those were the indicators statistically correlated like they're supposed to be? So I don't know if there's resources related to that in the technical document, because I know that's a pretty deep question when we're talking about statistical correlation and things like that, but I thought you might want to just speak to it too.
John, did you want to talk about this, or you want me to?
Go ahead, Katie.
Yeah, so we didn't necessarily do a statistical analysis of, how each of the indicators correlates to the other indicators. I mean, I think, you can clearly see if you, use a side-by-side viewer and you open, a socioeconomic indicator, and then you open the overall score, you can definitely see some correlation there. But because this data is coming from all different sources, it represents the most current data that's available for that particular indicator. So not all of the years of the data that we used is lined up. It's difficult to do those statistical correlations, I think, and that wasn't really our intent here. So I don't know if that answers the question.
No, I think it does. And I guess as a follow-up question to that, is there an easy way to see the age of the different data layers?
Yes.
Can you click on the 3 dots and see it, or where is that held?
Well, all of it's in our technical document, and at the beginning of each section that that goes over the different categories. There's just a table there that just gives some very basic information about each of the indicators, what the source was and what the year the data was. And then, you know, of course, it goes into a lot more depth on each of the indicators and talks specifically about how each of those indicators were scored, the method used to do that.
Okay. I know this is some light reading, this technical.
Oh, yes.
I think about that sometimes too, where it's like, okay, well, if I can't sleep at night, either I'm going to be very interested in this because it's going to draw me in, or it's going to make me really tired. All right, so we are talking, there's one more question, because I know we're getting kind of short on time, and I want to make sure that we get to a couple of the other kind of follow-up things, just so people have all the information they need kind of going forward here. So the question was, are we going to be requiring EGLE staff to use MiEJScreen once it gets finalized, whenever, you know, that is? So is that going to be something that we use internally, or will we still use EPA's EGLE? So I'm going to talk a little, just as one quick example, Katie, and then if you want to follow up on that. So one of the things that we currently use EPA's EGLE for on a pretty regular basis is to determine whether or not greater outreach might be helpful for a community for an air, because I do air permitting, I'm talking from an air permitting perspective. We also use EPA's EGLE to determine if that community in the surrounding area would meet our limited English proficiency plan to need translation services to help folks in that area be able to better interact with us from a public participation perspective. So, and I'm not the supervisor of anybody or anything, but if I was, I would say we should be using, you know, this data that is more related to Michigan and is specific to Michigan. So, you know, I see that we'll likely shift over to using MiEJScreen when it becomes completely available. I think we're kind of playing around in it now and just seeing, like we've talked about before, are those things lining up? Are we getting that same information? So that's how I see that happening. I don't know that it's going to necessarily be a mandate though internally. So Katie, I just want to give that example, and then I didn't know if you wanted to just add on to that.
Yeah, sure. And I think related to that example that you provided, one of the benefits of EPA's EGLE is that it lets you kind of dive more into some of the demographic information. So you can look specifically at, you know, what types of languages are spoken in certain areas. So there may be certain times where we can still utilize some of that information, even though it is, you know, census data that we could look up in a different way. It's just kind of nice that it's, you know, there to be able to use it. But I definitely agree that, you know, now that we have this tool and it has some similar functionality as EPA's EGLE, for example, the screening report that John showed, that we'll primarily be using this. And I guess I don't think that there'll ever be like a mandate across the department that every employee uses it, just because everyone's programs are so different, everybody's doing different things. But I think you provided a really good example of where there's some consistency in the use.
All right, well, thanks to John and Katie for everything today. I'm going to go ahead and just share my screen. We have a couple things that we want to go over here just to follow up at the end, kind of close the loop on some of the information that we shared. So I'm just putting up on the screen again really quickly how you can provide comments. But the best way to do that is, you know, is to go to that michigan.gov/environmental justice. All of the information we talked about today is on there, links to further meetings, links to the office hours, things like that. Speaking of office hours, so office hours are April 13th and May 2nd. Those are 12 to 1, so it's just 1 hour on those days. It will be basically like, come and join. Do you have a question on, like the question we had, is there a layer on cancer occurrence? How do you find that? How does this work? It's going to be a very like Q&A, how does the tool work? Not necessarily delving into all the things that we did today, because we want people who want to make comments to really get in there and dig around and find, you know, where there's things that we can fix. So hopefully you'll do that. We also have another informational session tonight. So if you really want to hear more, we're going to be going over the same presentation, but there's going to be a different kind of Q&A that goes on. So if you want to join for that later on this evening, that's 6 to 7:30. So then those next sessions are going to be April 27th, the same times as today. So 1 to 2:30, 6 to 7:30. And we are going to be accepting verbal public comment at those meetings, but you obviously don't have to wait to give us comment. If you find something big, small, you want to send us a data set that you really feel strongly we should include. All of those kinds of things are going to be considered, and we really encourage folks to reach out and get a hold of us. So speaking of that, if you want to get a hold of Katie, you can send an email to EGLE-environmental justice, all one word, at michigan.gov as in government, or give a call to 517-249-0906. So like I said, we really appreciate everybody coming in today. I know maybe my excitement is a little high, but I feel like I've been waiting since we talked about doing this for this to come out. So this feels like a really big day for us to finally be really talking about it with a lot of people. So let us know your questions, give us your comments. Hopefully we'll see you joining in with us on one of our other sessions. And if we don't, please feel free to reach out with questions. And I hope you guys have a really great rest of your day, and hopefully it warms up sometime soon here. So thanks so much, and we'll talk to y'all soon.